My name is Daniela Silvestrin, and I'm a curator based in Berlin. So I'm the only participant here who's not actually an artist and doesn't have an own artistic practice, but I come from a curatorial background, and I was invited because of my long engagement now with artists that work with radio, both in terms of what we understand as radio art, but in a broader sense, so radio as the electromagnetic sphere. And so my curatorial interest specifically is in practices, artistic practices that engage with society and the technosciences on the one hand, and in terms of formats, I have a strong interest and focus on practices that give an embodied knowledge of these topics. So trying to engage the audience and engage visitors to really develop something that refers to or gives an idea of where our sensory perception with our human bodies might be limited or might not give us access to certain topics. So in 2013, I started working with two artists, Mario de Vega and Victor Mazon, who had been already doing, since 10 years, projects related to the electromagnetic sphere, specifically in relation to wireless telecommunication technologies, and how they observed changes in our individual and societal behavior based on the immense increase of devices and technologies that we were using since the turn of the century. And together we worked on a publication which is called Leman Ecologies of Transmissions, that brought together the artistic research and various projects by Mario and Victor. So it's a collection of an overview of their common work in this field. And my part was to invite different authors to reflect about various aspects related to these societal, environmental, social, and political topics that we found most interesting and important. And the special thing about this publication is that it was produced with a cover. I have it here, and you can also have a look at it later if you want. Or let me start first. On the left-hand side, you see a little antenna that the two of them developed, and which was the basis for many of their works, like sound performances, sound installations. It is a sniffer antenna that translates a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum into sound frequencies. And this same circuit of the antenna is included in the cover of the book. So the circuit, you see it here as the design, and inside the circuit kind of, it is actually connected to an audio output. So it gives you the possibility to read and look at these projects and texts while listening to this kind of translation of the electromagnetic frequencies and traffic that is surrounding you in this moment. So it kind of immerses you, or it gives you a different access to the topic that you're reading about. So this was the first bigger project that I did together with artists related to that topic. And in 2022, another bigger project I did was a series of events organized in Berlin that was called Forests of Antennas, Oceans of Waves. This is the project where you can see here the documentation and like research materials of which I present as my let's say, stand or booth here in Radiotopia event. And this is also the basis for the workshop that I proposed as part of the program the last 2 days. And I need to understand. So this is the website of the project that happened in 2022. And it is like over the months from May to October, we organized a series of 7 interventions. There was an exhibition, we had sound performances, a conference, let me think, there was something else even. So it was really a diverse program spanning the course of several months. And you can see here, if you're interested, and look up the website. There's the whole documentation and explanation. There's a library with a couple of texts that were the basis for our research. Our means I did this project together with 2 colleagues, Shintaro Miyazaki and Birgit Schneider. Shintaro is a digital and media computation scholar, and Birgit is a professor of knowledge cultures and media environments in Berlin. So together with them, we developed together this concept for the entire project and series, and they would then focused on the theoretical part of the conference, and I organized the artistic program. And our starting point was actually the discussion in Berlin that at that time was very strong about turning Berlin into a smart city and expanding 5G applications and technology all over the city. And so we wanted to, through this project, engage with the electromagnetic sphere in urban environments. And so the question that we took as a starting point was, how do these imperceptible waves change urban space, bodies, and societies? And I just wanted to quickly browse a bit through the types of events that we did. I won't go into details of everything. So we started with the intervention, the urban interventions. We had 7 interventions with different artists and artists collectives proposing new types of engagement with the urban environment based on their own practices related to the electromagnetic sphere. We had urban walks here, for example, with Bureau d'Etudes, going through the city and measuring, really looking at exposure limitation standards, looking at measurements of the amount of frequencies that we are exposed to. That was the start. We had an intervention with Radio Otherwise. Radio Otherwise is a collective of which Kate Donovan, who has a stand downstairs, is also part. With Radio Otherwise, we looked at both natural and human-made waves along the river. So they set up a studio and a space on a boat on the River Spree in Berlin. And for 4 hours, they were traveling along the Spree, capturing the various signals on their way there, and looking at looking at how these sources changed, how the soundscapes changed, how this, let's say, urban space, the waterways in Berlin, which are very present, kind of also have their own way of reflecting and kind of reflecting these frequencies and signals that where natural and human-made signals mix. People could listen to this as a stream, but also via micro FM at a final performance. We met close to the riverside and could listen to their performance at dawn through radio transmitters that the audience brought, and could participate in this performance. We had an intervention with the artist duo Kobakant, who work with textiles and digital ways of creating and using textiles. They were knitting an antenna, inviting the audience, the passerbys, to contribute to this growing antenna that over the series of a couple of hours was getting bigger and bigger, and while getting bigger was transmitting the sounds that it would receive, and that changed over time while the antenna was growing. We had an intervention with the artist duo Sara Grant and Danya Vasiliev, who invited the audience to engage really with the science of how signals and how electromagnetic waves travel through space and how they behave when they meet obstacles. So they first gave an introduction into these mechanisms, and they developed a little leaflet that told people to move as a signal. So in general, so it was about the embodying or really trying to imagine how it would be like if we were a signal ourselves. What does it mean if a signal gets reflected? When does it get refracted? What is diffraction? When is it scattered? When is it being absorbed? So it really gave an insight into the science behind waves and signals traveling through space, encountering obstacles, and to kind of get an access, a physical experience of how it would be like to travel in that way. We had an intervention with Nicolas Nova, an anthropologist and design theorist who's specialized in design fiction practices, and he invited a group of people to engage with urban and digital infrastructures of the city, to really go walk the city, look for objects that refer to digital communication and wireless communication technologies, and then to come back and with these design fiction practices envision uses for these objects and for these infrastructures and for these technologies that can bring a better future. Let's say, look at infrastructures and look at them in a critical way, and envision or think of new types of uses and new types of ways that we engage with by creating street posters that would advertise these new ways of using technology. We had an intervention with Selena Savic and Gordon Savicic. It was an intervention into the Museum of Communication in Berlin. They had at that time a temporary exhibition called Common Objects, which was referring to telecommunication devices as having become these very having become common objects in our habits, in our daily lives, and the way that they have been integrated into our environments in different ways. And they looked, they took it further. They took it to not looking only at telephones and other objects that we think of when we think about telecommunication, but they looked at the antennas that are actually necessary for these kind of telecommunication devices, and looked at them as a kind of new nature. So we looked at different forms, different shapes of antennas, which type of shape is being used for which type of technology, for which type of telecommunication object in some cases, and thought about antennas as a kind of new nature. So how antennas have become a totally ubiquitous and common object in our environment, and how this can be seen as a kind of evolution, let's say technological evolution into our environment. Last intervention was by Teresa Dillon, offering a city walk as well, looking at infrastructures and especially at the topic of care and repair, looking at or talking about repair and looking at infrastructures from the repair and care aspect of it. After we finished the series of interventions, we had a conference and sound installation in the Museum of Communication. It was a sound installation by Mario de Vega, specifically developed for this event and for this space. It was a 24 hours sound installation that was based on recordings that he had been capturing in the days before the conference of all, audience and visitors passing by, talking, just let's say the whole sound movement or sounds that were present in the space in the days before. And then created an installation that would kind of modulate these sound registrations through the activity of mobile phones and other wireless signals traveling in the space at that time. So the amount of, or the presence of visitors, the amount of visitors and their phones and other wireless signals like Wi-Fi, etc., being present in the space during these 24 hours was modulating these soundscapes or sound recordings that he had been registering and kind of constantly played as a kind of score into the space. We also had an exhibition at the end with two artists, Susanna Hertrich and Jonathan Keats, who both engaged with really the human and non-human sensorium and sensorial perception of electromagnetic waves. They both have practices that go into speculative or take a speculative form and direction, and we're looking at how certain animals are disturbed by or manipulated through the increase in electromagnetic activity through our telecommunication technologies, and speculating about how in the future we could respect this more and kind of develop new technologies that not only are good for people but also for our environments, or especially non-human living organisms. And last but not least, we had a concert night with two artists, Marta Zapparoli and Martin Haus, who both have like long years of sound practices related to the electromagnetic sphere. Marta, for example, is doing since long an intense research on northern lights and the electromagnetic activity that is the reason for northern lights in the far northern hemisphere. And she builds her own antennas to capture these activities and then turn them into sound concerts, which she presented as a new piece also in that evening. For all our urban interventions, we always had also a kind of mobile exhibition being present for people who were interested in engaging with the research and with additional materials we presented together with yeah, the event itself. So this was, let's say, in very short, very condensed terms, what happened over the course of these 6 months in Berlin. And based on the experience with this series, I offered a workshop, or proposed a workshop here during the last days that asked participants to go for a walk in Taipei. And it had, let's say, 3 components. I invited them to take the book that I showed you earlier, and to go and listen to the city and to how the soundscapes change when you move through the city. How does it affect your perception? How does it affect your experience, really, of navigating a space that we are very used to navigate? We are mostly using our vision to navigate it, the traffic lights, signs on the street. We know when we can cross a street and when we can't, and we know when to be careful to not be distracted. But when you suddenly expand your sensory perception and realize that there's other input, there's other environments that suddenly change, and for the moment you don't know for what reason, what does it to you? How do you see, how might this change how you see or how you feel the city and how you feel about navigating in the city? That was the first part. The second part and proposal was to use these instructions that I explained earlier, developed by Sarah Grant and Dania Vasiljev for the project Embodying Electromagnetic Expressions, and to try for a couple of minutes to move as a signal. How can you navigate the city? Where are obstacles suddenly, changing completely? You were planning to go that direction and to reach a certain goal, or you were supposed to go there, but then you encounter a car or a glass facade, and then according to these rules, you have to change your direction, and that's what happens to signals. So try to embody a signal. Try to behave like a signal. What does that do to your way of moving? And the last and third part was to look at also, or was based on Nicolas Nova's proposal and workshop, to look at urban infrastructures and to look at maybe little devices, elements in the city and in the streets that you would otherwise not pay attention to, and ask yourself, what is this? What are the cables that you see on a house facade? Do you find any antennas in the city? For me, it was very striking when I arrived here that the city doesn't seem to have any mobile phone antenna masts. So in Berlin, for example, but also other European cities, the mobile masts on rooftops are very visible. So that you can, every few hundred meters, you will find a house where you have mobile masts on top. When I first did this walk to myself here in the city, I couldn't find any antennas, and I was really wondering, it was a bit of a mystery for me, how the high-speed 5G mobile phone connection can work if there's no antennas around. Until I could see that they are very well hidden. So the city has a different way of hiding or not hiding different infrastructures. So the proposal was, or the task was, to go and look at infrastructures that you otherwise would not pay attention to, or that you see are a bit hidden, and kind of ask yourself, or even maybe understand what they are, what they do, what their purpose is, and to also look at this type of, or this kind of, or this aspect of our urban environments related to the electromagnetic sphere. And yeah, so I would now ask Alessandro for a moment to join me here because he took part in the first workshop. And we have a couple of pictures, thanks. We have a couple of pictures from that walk and their group. And I would ask you to just quickly explain what these pictures show, what your experience was, and yeah, what you did throughout this hour.
Yeah, thank you. I have to say it was quite exciting to do the workshop. It reminded me somehow of a treasure hunt we were chatting about. So finding something that you don't know where it is. But it was even more than a treasure hunt, because treasure hunt you find things that you know should be somewhere. And instead here was literally trying to find a presence that you can't see. So I think it's also part of the same concept of the radio. So knowing that there's a place where a signal comes from and you perceive it, you finally perceive it through a medium. So the book and the headphones that we used were really working in this respect. And of course there's also the thrill of the unexpected. So to hear the change of course there's a constant noise. So we realize that there are electromagnetic fields even outside here in the complete open space. But then we had particular experiences. This picture is next to a family mart, as you can see from the vitrine. And there was a quite, how can I say, undulating sound that we thought was coming from the cashiers over there. Of course, we can't say precisely, but it was perceivable only very close to that one, to that machine. And we had a walk also around, probably you can show some other picture for what we discovered. We were expecting much more sound from it because there's supposed to be electricity and cables, quite a lot of them, and instead there was only an augmentation, let's say, of the noise in general, but not particularly intense, I have to say. So maybe there is some shielding of the cables and the machines inside. And this is one of the most curious. It was near a restaurant, and there was that thing on the ceiling which looked like a plug, an electric plug, but actually it was emitting a quite specific small sound, relatively rhythmic, that was clearly distinguishable from the rest.
And it was not clear what it was?
No, I mean, that is one of the fascinating parts, that sometimes you locate the sound, so you can say, okay, it has to be from there. And in this case, there was nothing around it. So it was clearly coming from that specific little device, but then you have no idea why and what this device does, actually. And this was inside Carrefour Market in the basement. And it was curious how in the basement, probably because of the resonance, the signal, the noise was more intense somehow. And then we approached, I think that that should be a router, so there should be antennas for broadcasting the Wi-Fi. And the Wi-Fi has a very rhythmic signal, so it was really like a sort of an electric drum, and very intense. Probably it was the louder of all the others, the most louder. This was on the corridor that is between actually the surroundings here and the main road, and we were wondering why, because I mean we know about wireless cameras. When they transmit the signal wirelessly, then you can hear that. but this seemed to be wired. And still, whatever, from the camera or from the box on the top, there was a quite, I mean, a different type of noise. So it was on different frequencies that we could really perceive. And this was also kind of fun because it was very close to an acoustic instrument shop. So the contrast between the classic instruments, ukulele and guitars, and this noise was quite striking. And finally, I'm laughing here because we were really surprised by the intensity, I mean, the amount of noise that was coming off this phone shop. Of course, because there were plenty of smartphones activated, and of course each of them has quite a few transmitters. I better remember that the iPhone has 6 different transmitters for 6 different bands, so multiplied by all the phones that were inside, just being even a bit far from the vitrine, it was kind of a wave of signals coming to us. It was very intense, the most, not the louder, but really intense, a lot of noise coming from there.
Yeah, I really liked when we talked about the workshop afterwards, when we kind of reflected on what happened, when you brought the photos and stuff. This idea of, or realization how much it is both was something that you sense and that gives you access to, but it still remains total speculation. In that case, maybe less, because it's quite clear that the sources must be in there, not individually which source is responsible for what type of sound, but that you need to, like in the moment where you get access with your senses, do you want to understand where it comes from? You want to look for it, and yeah, refers also to your treasure hunt idea, but...
Yeah, somehow I was thinking just a moment ago that your metaphor of a forest is particularly apt. I mean, there are plenty of metaphors for the urban space, like jungle, but the forest of antennas, because I mean, if you are in a big forest, you have plenty of sounds that you can't decode immediately. You might think it's a small beast, an animal, a bird, but you don't know actually. So it's the same uncertainty somehow that.
And I think another metaphor that fits really well, and I came across only after the event series, so it's not really part in the reflections here. It's only visible through one little poster that I added with this insect. It's a metaphor or a term by Mark Wigley, the architectural historian, and he gave this lecture of, or I think it was also an exhibition about the human insect. So he was reflecting about architecture, how since we developed radio, how all the buildings have antennas, and so how every building has its own antenna, and we have our own antennas, and that it became so important for our urban environments and living spaces that it kind of turns us into human insects. So it is our antennas that we have in our hand or on our rooftop, but we need to kind of navigate with these antennas. And I think that's a nice image, because to take that further is really to kind of give us a sensorial perception of these frequencies and these signals, and to navigate better. It changes, at least in my experience, it's really changed how I navigate the city, how I live spaces, how much I pay attention to where signals come from and where there's an antenna or not. So far only by vision, but in that sense it distracts you, it kind of gives or turns your focus in unexpected ways that without the sound would not be possible to experience, I guess.
Yeah, if I can add one thing, yeah, I mean, giving another little bit of speculation. Since we are also emitting waves, I mean, our brain is constantly emitting waves, and I'm pretty confident that being exposed to these other waves creates some, I mean, some kind of interaction. And I'm not saying that, I mean, we are responding to anything, but I was just thinking that our organisms somehow perceive these waves. I mean, I'm, for example, very sensitive to Wi-Fi on, and I'm usually turning it off, and I almost physically feel when it's turned off and when it's turned on. But what I mean is, I'm wondering if our bodies, including our brain, is somehow, as the insects do, as you said, navigating it in an unawarely. And then through the workshop, there was fully awareness of it. But I'm wondering if there's even this other inner level somehow.
I mean, it's not, of course, a big topic. It was a big topic in various of our events and in the discussions behind the events that we had. And for sure, there's like, you can go into the scientific literature, and then it's there is these, let's say, exposure limitation rules and everything, and we're supposed to be safe, but it's still very contested, or kind of, there's a lot of fears and doubts about it. And I feel the same. Like, I think, of course, creating an awareness through the engagement changes our perception to a certain extent. In my case, for example, when I moved house in Berlin, I looked up, there's maps that show exactly where there's antennas on rooftops. I made sure to move into a flat that doesn't have an antenna in front. So without knowing if and how this could affect my body, I automatically tried to evade it a little bit. So, and it's also interesting, I think, to see that a quite natural reaction of ours is to say, wow, now that I know that it's so much, I want to hide a little bit from it. And where we know that organisms clearly do respond to it is in the animal kingdom. So there's so many species like birds or bees that clearly do react to these intense areas like urban spaces because they get confused in their navigation, or they somehow cannot, they cannot navigate mainly in the same way. They say that there's even more damaging effects as well, but I can't tell if that's proven or not. But still, I guess it's important. Like, it's only 100 years that we have this technology, and the way that this has changed our lives and our environments is enormous. We haven't changed any other atmosphere or environment as much as the electromagnetic sphere around us. We have from the whole spectrum, only visible light is what we can bodily perceive. So I think it's really necessary to think about, like, if we change something to such an extent, to be very critical about it, and to look both at, of course, what it does to our the way that we interact, but also, of course, to us being immersed in something that we don't know, and not only us, but also a lot of non-human organisms, or all non-human organisms that might suffer or might be affected through it. So to open up our awareness, I guess, is the most important thing. Maybe to conclude or open up also, if there's questions, I think I wrote down 4 keywords that participants brought back from the workshop, which I think are really nice. The first one was frustration, the second, imagination, The third, speculation and curiosity. And I think it's a really, it represents a really nice, in a really nice way what all this for me is about. It's about curiosity and imagination and also speculation, but also frustration. So I think that kind of covers very well the experience. But yeah, maybe just to give the opportunity for questions in case there should be any in the audience.
My name is Man Ray. Just quickly, in response to your question of like how or why in Taipei City the 5G antennas are like very visible. That is because the city government installed 10,000 of them on the street lamp post.
On the what?
On the street lamp post. Yeah, so you don't see them like widespread. Yeah, and another half of them actually are nowadays installing in this kind of existing infrastructure of the city government's environment.
Okay, and do you perhaps know why it's like inside? Is it really to hide? Is it because the normal sector antennas that at least I know as the telecommunication antenna structures are much bigger and are not so easy to hide. Now with 5Gs, antennas become smaller, are more easy to hide, but that's quite a recent thing. So older antennas are bigger and couldn't be hidden. Is there a reason to hide it? Is there also in Taipei, for example, a lot of discussion or otherwise like fears or are people against antennas, or is it for other reasons that it's such a hidden infrastructure?
Yes. In general, there's this like myth, kind of true myth. Antennas are bad for health. Okay, so any building that is installed with like huge antennas will reduce its real estate price immensely, at least like 10 to 20%. Yeah. So the city government want to use the smaller technology and to hide this kind of new infrastructure in the existing infrastructure. The Taipei City still quite see a lot of the old infrastructure. For example, the electric wires still hanging everywhere, and the early TV cables are still exposed. Yeah, but that is now being like put in the underground. Like in Berlin, they early planning to hide the electric wire underground. Yeah, but in Taipei, it's like because the city like changed so fast. Yeah, and then so much of it is still exposed. Yeah. And then now the new technology with like 5G, particularly with the Taipei, Taiwan's semiconductor chips getting smaller, we're able to produce like these things, and then install it in the existing environment. Yeah. So the forest is still there.
Yes, absolutely. it has a different shape, different species.
Invisible.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. We have a picture. Yeah, I can maybe. From your workshop, you mean? We can. Let's see if I can pull it up. This one?
Yeah. Is it this one? The one on the top?
Yeah.
This one?
Right.
Yeah.
So this is for mobile phone communication. Ah, I see. Wow, they're really small, yes.
Install like 2,000 or 20,000 to 30,000. And then at the moment, like half of them are installed in this kind of, yeah.
Wow. Thank you. other questions or comments or? Well, we can always continue having a conversation afterwards. I would at that point then conclude the panel also, because in 4 minutes the big concluding evening performance SICK will start. So thank you so much for being here, and yeah, look forward to continue the exchange. Thank you. And thank you, Alessandro.